Now, there is a profound gap between therapists and clients in religiosity. Statistically speaking, the typical client who walks into a therapist's office is likely to encounter a practitioner who assigns far less importance to religion than does the client. This leaves me somewhat astounded at how little attention intro psychology textbooks pay to the impact of religion on behavior and mental states. When you look at these books, religion is mentioned almost never, and yet it is so clearly important in the minds of so many Americans. One study actually shows that only about a quarter of cognitive and behavioral therapists professed a certain belief in God, and just under half of the clinicians sample deemed themselves non-believers. Another study looked at academic psychologists and found that psychologists are actually the least religious of all of the academic groups studied, and they studied most of them. So 50% considered themselves atheists and another 11% agnostic. So why does this gap matter? Therapists obviously exist at all levels of religiosity. Many nowadays do consider themselves spiritual but not religious, and that is also a category that's been growing among the American public. But quite a few therapists are uncomfortable discussing religious matters in therapy. Some therapists, even when they do talk about religion, they think of it as a source of dysfunction. Some of this comes from Freud. Some of this, actually, Albert Ellis was not a fan of religion, and that. I like this quote from Seymour Saracen. He was a Yale clinician who said that, basically said that when you found out that a colleague was devoutly religious in psychology, the other psychologists would look on them with puzzlement or often think of that person as having personal problems. Now, I might point out that people think that because I'm involved in this line of work, I'm deeply religious, which is not the case. And I consider myself affiliated with a religion and ethnically very identified as a Jew, but I don't consider myself much of a believer. I just see that religion is something that does seem to matter to a great deal of clients. And I think that the reluctance to deal with religious matters comes from a place that is sometimes reasonable. There's an unwillingness to cross the line between therapy and proselytization for one's own religious views, or really for non-religious views as well, whatever they may be. So therapists try to pretty much duck the issue. Now, the problem here is that people in need of psychological assistance may stay home if they think that they will be openly or secretly denigrated because of their religious beliefs. And that there's no reason to believe that the gap in religiosity leads necessarily to insensitivity, but clients and patients report various difficulties that can impede progress, even when people are well-intentioned. Psychologists differ considerably in their ability and willingness to consider religious matters. And that one issue is that many people in this field, in our field, they recognize the inadequacy of their clinical training in teaching them how to handle religious issues. And that about a fifth of therapists never discuss religious matters at all in therapy. And that many people say that it has not been handled well in their training. So what do we learn when we look at the relationship between research and mental health? Well, one thing I learned when I wrote my textbook on the psychology of religion, which just came out, was that there have been thousands of studies, literally thousands of studies, trying to assess the relationship between religion and health, physical and mental. I was shocked to find so many studies. In order to understand this many studies, you have to rely heavily on meta-analyses. And I've even noticed in this field that they now have meta-analyses of the meta-analyses. So that when you look at it, though, what we find out is that religious practices are very often intertwined for better or worse with psychological well-being. And that most of the meta-analyses in this vast literature have concluded that on balance, religious belief and affiliation are net positives. The religiously affiliated seem to get benefits in longevity, mental health, coping with severe illness, avoiding substance abuse, and staying on the right side of the law. Now, just why these are correlations, obviously, and just why the correlations occur, there's plenty of room for debate about that. And there's also arguments about generalizability. When you talk about religion, most of the studies have been done with American Christians. Some have been done with, and a lot of Protestants. So some have been done with Catholics. Some have been done with Jews. But we don't know how well this is going to generalize once we start getting beyond those populations. Even with the thousands of studies, there are other non-Western religions are understudied. That in general, the people who do this research often see themselves as advocates for greater integration of religion or spirituality into healthcare. But even those people who disagree with that agree that religion can have benefits for physical health, mental health, life satisfaction, and general well-being. Here's where the disagreements are. First of all, how large are the effects? What are the particular health benefits? One thing is longevity. For example, if you look at obituaries that mention that somebody was involved in their religious community, and you compare them to obituaries that don't mention that somebody was involved in their religious community, the average age of death for the people who were involved with religion, when you look at it for a general population, the gap can be about 8 years, suggesting an 8-year gap. Now, some of that might be that as people get older and live into old age, they are more likely to get involved with religion. But the gap is pretty large. And when you look at it for African Americans, the gap between ones that say somebody was very involved in their religious community and some that don't say it at all in the obituary is about 16 years, which is huge. But anyway, there are lots of debates about the sorts of religion that can provide benefits or the types of spirituality, whether it applies to all subject populations, what about negative health effects because of religious beliefs and negative mental health effects, and above all, about the mechanisms through which religion impacts health when it does, and mental health. There are a lot of different theories on this. Some of them emphasize the social support and practical resources. For example, if you get sick and you're religious, somebody may come to your house to check on you to help you out. There may be the church itself may provide support groups for various types of, say, mental health problems or issues coping with life. There are also psychological resources that may be a product of religious attitudes. For example, belief in an afterlife might be a very comforting belief, or belief in how you're supposed to handle life's crises and events. As long as you have any manual, whether it's right or wrong, there can be benefits from that. And then there, of course, are social identity resources that come from being a member of a religious group and feeling like you're a part of something. I am not arguing that mainstream therapy should become faith-based. I think that the problem here is that neglect of religious issues can negatively impact therapeutic process and client outcomes. If a therapist seems uncomfortable or unreceptive to discussion of religious matters, a client may censor problems and potential solutions steeped in religion because they fear negative responses. There are all sorts of ways that religion can prove useful to clients who think that religion is an important part of their life. Some of the solutions may not appeal to therapists because they would not seem like they would be useful for therapists. But of course, our job is to help clients where they are. And so so to omit religion would be to leave out significant resources for improvement.